water up here because I could tell that I was coming down with a cold. I feel a lot better compared to what I felt like Thursday. And let me just put it that was definitely the worst day. But I do apologize. I've got some throat lozenge here and some water in case I need to get through this morning. One of my parents' favorite movies is The Man with Two Brains. You remember this movie? It stars Steve Martin. And whenever it comes on, I just have to chuckle. Now, Steve Martin has kind of a unique type of comedy. And the story goes like this. He plays a brain surgeon by the name of Dr. Hafahar. And Dr. Hafahar has fallen in love with an evil and conniving temptress that is played perfectly by Kathleen Turner. And Dr. Hafahar is entranced by the beauty, by the sexiness and the conniving ability of Kathleen Turner's character that tries to convince him at all costs to get married. And nothing is going to get in the way of this wedding. And Dr. Hafar, I just love saying that name, isn't quite certain if he wants to get married. And so we're actually going to see a clip from the movie right now that what he does is his character decides to ask his late wife. He stands in front of her portrait. She's already dead at this point, obviously. But anyway, you'll catch on. So, okay.
Becca, if there's anything wrong with my feelings for Dolores, just give me a sign.
If you remember the movie, you know that he doesn't listen to the advice of his late wife, and he goes ahead and he gets married. Listening, selective listening. My dad is one of 7. And my dad and his brothers and sisters tell the story that my Grandma Dorothy had selective hearing. And maybe that's what happened when you have 7 kids. You just kind of pick and choose what you want to listen to. But my dad and my aunts and uncles also tell the story that when they would say things that they thought that my grandma wasn't listening to, she had heard the whole everything, every word. I think selective listening also occurs in those times when we really want to hear something. Maybe you heard the story about the 90-year-old man. He goes to the doctor, and a couple days later, the doctor sees him at Walmart, and this 90-year-old man is walking arm in arm with a beautiful 30-year-old woman. And the guy looks at the doctor, he says, "Doc, thanks for the advice. I did exactly what you said." And the doctor says, I don't understand. What did I say? And the 90-year-old man says, "You said, find a hot mama and be cheerful." And the doctor said, "No, you have a heart murmur, so be careful." Don't you just hate it when they miss your advice, Doc? Today is a unique Sunday. We started worship with the famed procession of the palms. Jesus riding triumphantly in Jerusalem, either on a donkey or a colt. We know this as the start of Holy Week. A few days, triumph is going to turn into sorrow. A few days, we are going to have the Last Supper. And a day after that, it's going to be brutal. Rejection, beatings, humiliation, and of course, death. Now, for those of us who witness to Christ, this is the highest holiday of the year. This is the crux of our faith. So today, we're actually going to look at a passage that leads right up to this. We're not going to talk about the Passion. We're not going to talk about the Palms. We're actually going to look at about a chapter before these things happen. Because we cannot understand what takes place today and what's going to take place here in a few days unless we know what leads up to this event. And so, not only that, but it also illustrates perfectly everything we've been talking about during the season of Lent. And it's a great story about listening. So, I'm going to turn over to Sandy. Would you share with us our gospel?
Our scripture is from Mark 9, verses 2 through 9. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up to a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who was talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it's good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. And then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice, "And this is my son, the beloved. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus. And as they were coming down the mountain, he ordered them to tell no one about what they had seen until after the Son of Man had risen from the dead.
Thank you, Sam. For the final time in this sermon series, we have the famous, go ahead and say it with me, Messianic secret. For those of you that are just joining us for our celebration today, we've been talking about something that is only unique to the Gospel of Mark. None of the other Gospels talk about this sense of the secret. And today it is perfectly illustrated. Something incredible, almost a supernatural event, such as the Transfiguration, followed by Jesus saying, "Okay, shh, now don't tell anyone." We've been hearing this throughout the season of Lent. And now we're finally 1 week away and we're saying, finally! Because we've been talking about this secret throughout this season. We've been told that we cannot understand Jesus' ministry until we get to Easter. We've been aware that we cannot understand the mission of Jesus Christ until we experience Easter. In essence, one cannot understand the secret until we get to what Jesus goes through this week. Now, next week, the secret, the mystery, whatever Mark likes to refer to it as, will be revealed. But today, right now, I'm inviting you to not do this. Do not stop reading. Now, this right here is ingrained in us. When we see it, we stop. Now, I'm not naive enough to think that all of us do just that. I know for some of you here, when you see this, it just means slow down. For some of you, it also means when you see this and there's no cops around, you're just going to go right on through. But when you were little, the sign here, the shape, the color, even the word stop means something to us. It tells us this is what we're supposed to do. And today, I don't want you to do that. Why? Because we are this close to Easter. And it is so easy to get caught up in the palms, into the triumphant entry of Jesus, into the very majesty of Jesus, that what we want to do is we want to stop. Why? Because the passion is too hard. The stories of Jesus' death are too gruesome. And the stuff about the secret, we can't make heads or tails of it. So what do? We stop. We give up. And we stick with the Jesus that we know. Hey, I've been there. I love the Jesus that gives hell to the money changers. I love the Jesus that really gives it to the religious authorities. I certainly skipped over those secret passages in Mark because I didn't understand them until I read the Gospel of Mark the way Mark intended it. From the very beginning, right there with Jesus' baptism. And if you know Mark, there's no story of Jesus' birth. There's no story of what takes place in his childhood. It starts with baptism. And you just quickly move right on through until you get to Easter. And then when I did that, it was like this aha moment. It was this epiphany. It was like everything was crystal clear. I realized what Mark was trying to tell me. I didn't see it before. I certainly wasn't listening for it. But like you, like many of you, I was looking for Jesus that was just the healer. I was looking for Jesus that was just the miracle worker. I was looking for Jesus that was just the transfigured man. I was looking for Jesus that was just the social reformer. I was looking for Jesus that was just the great preacher. Now, these are all great. But if I were to focus on just these characteristics, I would miss what Mark was trying to tell me. I would miss what makes this gospel so exciting. Greg George is a pastor in Palmetto, Georgia. He tells the story one time of watching a football game that was being played on AstroTurf. And the home team won in the final seconds against their rival. And as you might imagine, everyone just stormed the field. They started tearing down the goalposts. They were so excited they actually began to cut up into the AstroTurf to take it with them. Now, Pastor George says that we should get that excited about the story of the gospel that we have to replace the carpet every year because people are so passionate, so excited about the message that we have here that people are willing to tear up the carpet. Now, Max, I really didn't say that, but that's what Pastor George says we should do. Folks, that's why we keep reading, because of this passion. Now, that doesn't really explain why the disciples followed Jesus. I mean, why do they continue to follow this guy? For 9 chapters now, Jesus continues to say something very similar. Keep it a secret, keep it to yourself, don't tell anybody. And story after story, they just don't get it. Yet they keep with Jesus. Even when Jesus says, now hush up, wait, just keep it to yourself, they're willing to follow this guy. They are willing to go through a stop sign for this guy. Why? Let me share a story with you. James Thornhill was painting the inside ceiling of St. Paul's Cathedral. And one time he was stepping back on the scaffolding to kind of look back at the whole picture when his left foot was perilously right on the edge of the scaffold. Now his assistant saw it. He didn't. And so his assistant could have yelled at him, which probably would have scared him and he would have fallen to his death. But instead, his assistant took a paintbrush, dipped it into a paint bucket, and actually started painting over the masterpiece. And with that, Thornhill rushed forward to admonish his assistant until his assistant said, hey, I just did that to save your life. For which Thornhill was incredibly thankful. You see, Thornhill only saw part of the picture. He didn't see what was going to happen completely. Mark, in crafting this sermon, we call it a gospel, is seeing what some others do not see. And it becomes quite evident. The messianic secret is key to understanding Jesus' ministry. And the key is found right here at verse 9. As they were coming down the mountain, he ordered them to tell no one about what they had seen until after the Son of Man had risen from the dead. Excuse me. The key is Easter. It's why the disciples continue to follow Jesus. Because they know that something is going to happen that day. Now, we are almost to Easter and the end of this sermon series. Now, you've heard me say that we're following this story arc. It is something that is quite famous in Hollywood. It's when you have a story that goes on for several episodes and then you have an end. Now, when we read Mark here, we realize that Hollywood was not the one that invented this storytelling ability. In reading Mark, we know that he has come up with a very compelling way to understand the story of Jesus. Because Mark wants us to keep on reading all the way to Easter so that we can have this full picture of who Jesus is and what Jesus is all about. And it starts right there with the first healing act of Jesus. Do you remember that story? Remember that sermon? Jesus heals a man with a demon. And in that passage, we had to deal with this question. Why don't people recognize Jesus in his lifetime? Now, if you remember that sermon, the only person that recognizes who Jesus is the person with the demon. It's not the disciples. It's not even the people that were in the pews in that synagogue. It was not even the followers of Jesus outside the synagogue. It was the person that we least expect. And then we moved on to another story about where Jesus heals the leper. And in that, dealing with that question again, why do people not recognize Jesus in his lifetime? Jesus, and using the Greek here, he says that he angrily tells the leper not to tell anybody. But what happens again? The leper goes out and tells everybody. And Mark tells us that the leper only saw part of the story. And then we had last week's passage. And finally, a sense of satisfaction. In it, Peter acknowledges Jesus as the Messiah. And so we're thinking to ourselves, finally, we can stop. Peter has acknowledged Jesus as the Messiah. We don't need to go any farther. And one of the things we find out in today's passage, it illustrates that we are not to Easter yet. Peter, you see, expects the Messiah to be easy. He expects this whole thing to be grandiose. And he certainly does not want to have this idea of suffering and rejection and death. What does the passage say? Then Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Peter, James, and John, they only saw part of the picture. What is hidden will be revealed on Easter. Because see, what they think they see is just a man in dazzling white. What they think they see is a man that is standing next to 2 historical figures of the Bible. What they think they see is just a supernatural event. They think this is what Jesus is. They think they recognize his significance. They even hear God's announcement. But then in verse 9, Jesus says, now hold on, you still don't get it. The full picture of who I am, of my significance to all of you, and what my ministry is all about, is not completely revealed yet. You will get it, so keep on reading. Stephen Lang tells a powerful story about a man who misinterpreted a part of Scripture. He only read parts of the Bible with tragic results. It was a tense time, just before the Civil War, and the slaveholders feared a bloody uprising. Well, those fears came to life in a man by the name of Nat Turner. Nat was a preacher. He was an ex-slave, and he does lead a revolt in Virginia in the year 1831. It's brutal. Kills 50 people. Eventually, Nat was captured, was hanged. Now, Nat Turner knew his Bible. In fact, his owner would sell him off to plantations to preach to these slaves that they should stay in slavery. And he knew his scriptures, and so he would often preach from Titus, tell slaves to be submissive to their masters, and to give satisfaction in every respect. They are not to talk back. Then, if that didn't work, he would quote from Ephesians, slaves, obey your earthly masters with fear and trembling, and singleness of heart as you obey Christ. But Nat Turner knew his Bible, and he realized that 2 can play at that game, that people kind of picking out what they want out of the Bible. And so when he was ready to lead his revolt, and he spoke in front of his soldiers, he quoted from Exodus, whoever kidnaps a person, whether that person has been sold or is still held in possession, shall be put to death. But the full picture of the Bible also includes forgiveness, also includes reconciliation. Many a religious war has been fought and started over misinterpretations of Scripture, over people that are cherry-picking what they want out of the Bible. So what is the full picture of Jesus' ministry? Well, I want you to think of today's passage as kind of a cliffhanger. Now, you are fortunate. You don't have to wait a year. You don't even have to wait a season. The understanding, the mystery of the Messianic secret will be revealed to you next week on Easter. But just in case you can't wait that long, let me share with you a hint. And we've been doing this throughout this sermon series because Mark does it. He calls them clues, these ideas, these clues that kind of want people to keep on reading because these clues will all make sense on Easter. And today's clue today's hint actually is at verse 9. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice, "This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him." God makes the announcement, "This is my son." God doesn't say, "Hey, look, Jesus is all dazzling white." God doesn't say, "Hey, look at this supernatural event." No. God's announcement is very simple. "This is my son. Listen to him." That's wisdom. Understanding the messianic secret comes from listening to Jesus. Our focus on miracles and incredible events is good. We need to focus on the bigger picture. On Easter, we're going to know it. But today, we need to focus on the very words and power of Jesus. Let me tell you about Evelyn Stokes. Evelyn lives in Richmond, Virginia. Her children are her world. She works really, really hard to make sure that they stay in school and they stay out of trouble. And it's not an easy job, especially for a single mom, raising a family in poverty in inner city Richmond in a violent neighborhood. And Evelyn was especially strict on her only son, Jonte, because she knew that too many young men get involved with gangs and drugs in their neighborhood. And Jonte, when he started hanging around with the wrong crowd, Evelyn got more involved in his life. They started spending more time together. They started communicating together. Until one day, when 17-year-old Jonte was shot and killed by a handgun that his friend was playing around with. When Evelyn first heard the news, she just collapsed into a ball of grief. She was so overwhelmed that the only words that came to her were Jesus. Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. It was the only prayer that she could muster. She didn't focus on the dazzling white of Jesus. She didn't focus on this idea that a miracle could come and bring her son back to life. She just focused on those words, on that power, and on what Jesus went through, on what Jesus will go through this week. And suddenly it all came to her. The promise of Christ. Jesus was with her. When she needed him the most, Jesus comforted her. She still grieved, but she felt peace with his presence. Today, Evelyn Stokes heads the comfort ministry in her church. She says, "The day my son died, I learned that God is truly alive. I believed it before Jonte's death, but never knew the extent of God's power, that he can fill us inside and change our hearts and lives forever." My friends, the full picture of God's plan is laid out before you. We've had the hints. We've learned the clues. We've certainly followed the journey of the Messianic secret. We've been exposed to the recognition of why don't people recognize Jesus in his lifetime. We've learned that Jesus is more than just a preacher, more than just a healer, more than just a social reformer. Next week, we will read the end. And it will fulfill our full picture of God's plan. We cannot understand, we cannot know Jesus until he enters our heart and experiences our pain and knows our sorrow. When that occurs, we can acknowledge, no, we will recognize who Jesus is. Don't stop reading. Stay tuned. Amen. I'm going to ask our ushers now